Good morning. Welcome to episode 20 of Tea, Coffee, and Torah. I am so excited to be with you this morning because I have found something that I think is very enlightening. It's not often that, I kind of learn something new or I see a new connection. And this week has been one of those weeks. So I have dealt with this information quite often. And I've never quite made the connection that I saw this time. But anyways, I want to discuss today the problem of Samuel. And this is Samuel the prophet from the book of Samuel. Now, I do want to make a quick little note because I have talked about how I'm going to be reading excerpts from the preface of my book on a daily basis or with this class. I'm actually going to do that today, later this afternoon. So be watching for that. I'm going to come back on a little bit later and we're going to read another paragraph and I would love your interaction. But today I want to share this with you. Now, if you'll go to my Facebook page, and I am going to put it eventually in the comments of this video here and on YouTube, I do have a Dropbox link to an Excel document that I created so you can see some of the issues with this yourself. So if you want to take a minute, go search for that on my Facebook page or in the comments associated with this video, and you're going to see that Excel document. So I'm going to jump right into it. So there is historically, and you can find this even anciently when you are looking at discussions of the book of Samuel, there appears to be a difficulty with the text. And that is the fact that the prophet Samuel wears an ephod, just like the priest. He performs sacrifices on behalf of the people, just like a priest. He speaks on Yahweh's behalf. And then, of course, a lot of scholars bring up the issue that Samuel also sacrifices in the high places. Now, we saw in episode 19 last time that during Samuel's lifetime, after maybe the age of 6 or 8, and I've got to grab a cup of joe, it's a little dry out here this morning. After, maybe by the time Samuel was 6 or 8, the tabernacle had been destroyed. The Ark of the Covenant had been captured by the Philistines, and the place was considered defiled. It was considered impure. It lost its sanctity. And oftentimes when a high place, and this could be Jerusalem, it could be Shiloh, it could be Shechem, it doesn't really matter where that high place is. Once it's been desecrated, it can no longer be a viable place of legitimate worship. With one exception, Jeremiah especially, and, throughout, you find that the prophecies of Jerusalem and then again in Isaiah too, the prophecies of Jerusalem are the only city where this exception is being made for a high place, losing its sanctity, losing its purity, becoming desecrated, and then regaining it and being reestablished in the same place. That's only in Jerusalem. For all these other high places, you find that once they are desecrated, they can never be reused again as a sanctified place. But with Samuel, we find that there was no centralized locale for a legitimate Israelite worship during Samuel's lifetime. Again, this is probably after the age of maybe 6 or 8. He was a very young child when the Ark of the Covenant was captured. So now we're going to get into the issues. How could Samuel function as a priest for Israel? How could he legitimately, and then this goes into our ability to see the overall text as trustworthy, for us to be able to see the stories that are related as something that we can depend on, and also its transmission to us today as something that is reliable. So let's get into some of these issues, because it really comes down to and this is the question. The whole entire question of Samuel is this: was Samuel a Levite? And that's what we're going to be discussing. So when I researched a linen ephod, and you find that both King David and Samuel wore this linen ephod, the question is, what is it? From the best of my research, this is still debatable. It appears that a linen ephod is simply a garment, an outer garment that had a representation of the ephod worn by the high priest. Now, the high priest ephod would have been something where it had actual stones in it, gems, but the linen ephod appears to have either been stained or dyed so that it represented the ephod worn by the high priest. That's the best my research came up with on that. But let's turn to Samuel 1:1, because the rest of the time we are focusing on Samuel's lineage. And this gets absolutely exciting when you see the correlation. So Samuel 1:1 says, "Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim." Keep this in mind, Mount Ephraim. The son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, and Ephraite. So, very clear. Samuel's father is from the territory of Ephraim, from the tribe of Ephraim. So this has led a lot of scholars and theologians. There's a lot of rabbis, a lot of theologians on both Jew and Christian side, and independent academic scholars who, from this text, just carte blanche, see Elkanah as an Ephraimite. He is from the tribe of Ephraim. So then they say, well, how can Samuel be functioning as a priest if he is from the tribe of Ephraim? But wait, there's more to the story. So the issue partly comes back to the very conflated state of affairs that we have regarding in Chronicles and the lineage that we have. But I want to show you how this all lines up. You find that Elkanah came to Shiloh on a yearly basis to sacrifice for his family. It was usually, even in ancient times with a high place or Israel's tabernacle existing in Shiloh, fathers of families, the heads of your families, came and they would offer sacrifices for their whole entire clan or for their family. This was something that you see not just in Israel, but you do see it in other societies as well. Now, when we look at 1 Chronicles 6, or let's start with 1 Chronicles itself, we find that there are very specific divisions of the families of Israel. We find that Judah's family is found in what is today 1 Chronicles chapter 2. Reuben's family is in 1 Chronicles chapter 5. Issachar and the rest of the families of Israel are in chapters 7. And Benjamin is in what is now today chapter 8. But we find that Levi, the house of Levi, is really dealt with in 1 Chronicles chapter 6. And this is where we find the chronology of Elkanah, or not the chronology per se, but the lineage. Now, if you will look, this is on that link that I posted. We find that parts of Elkanah's lineage, which is within the Levitical section of this lineage or genealogy, are very, very cogent. They're very, very much the same. And then we find a lot of it is very, very fragmented. So we find that when scholars see this, and this is something that I find, whether it's scholarship or whether it is just somebody who is religious, the least amount of evidence that we have, you will find the most definite, drawn in the sand, definitive conclusions regarding whatever the topic is. And this is really no other, you find this as well. The other thing that we find is that this list of families, it's very fragmented. And scholars' response to this is usually to take and assume an evil intent, to assume that, this was some redactionary that tried to legitimize this particular house, and make it sanctioned. But I don't think we have to resort to that, because I think when you take a very historical, very factual, very critical, approach to the text, I think it demonstrates the legitimacy. So let me share with you at least 3 issues when it comes to the genealogy, any genealogy that is found in the scripture. Number 1, the first issue is variant spellings of names. And that is what we're going to see with this lineage today. Number 2, there's and let me actually, before I go to number 2, with the variant spellings of names, we find this is not just an issue in Israel. This was very much an issue in ancient Egyptian texts as well, especially during the New Kingdom in Israel. The New Kingdom in Egypt, which would have been from about 1450 all the way down to 1250, and even later, all the way down to around 1000 BCE. You find that the conflation of names, the variant spelling of names, is something that is very, very common in my working with the King's List, and how they based the kings of Assyria or in the kings of Babylon, how they based the reigns of kings based on the rulers of the land. And each, in the Eponym list, each king was attributed to a different ruler for that particular period. Well, I found conflation in that as well. And that's something else I'll publish eventually. But just for our discussion today, variant spellings of names is one issue that arises when we're dealing with genealogies. Number 2, conflations of ancestors. So when you are listing ancestors, you're going to start with this person, go back and back and back and back, and you could go back maybe 10, 12 generations. Well, you may find that, another branch of the family is mentioned, or you find that the scribe working with that text, conflates, this ancestor may be listed 8 times in a specific genealogical sequence, but when that scholar is working with it, he'll pick it up at a different point in that sequence, or he'll conflate it just because it is mentioned so many times, he gets it confused. The other issue is going to be the influence of local dialects, with regards to how a name is pronounced and how a name is recorded. And what I have seen in my studies is that oftentimes names are mentioned that are recorded what have been anciently phonetically. I know there's some people that when they study the text, they want to put a lot of emphasis on the Paleo-Hebrew and the fact that the representations of the characters in the name actually had a lot of value for ancient society. I am not finding this to be the case. I am finding that this really demonstrates emphasis on a phonetic language, on an alphabetic language, and that the spellings and the variants that we have today are based on what have been in ancient phonetics. So let's delve into this. And I'm just going to mention this. I'm going to do my best. I do encourage you to, it's a sloppy Excel document, but if you can bring up that Excel document that I posted earlier today from Dropbox, and I'm just going to go through this. Oh, and let me mention one other factor. This is a fourth factor that comes into the play with genealogies. And this is the fact that the normal sequence, the logical way that you're going to mention a genealogy for a family is going to descend from oldest ancestor down to the modern ancestor. Well, we find in some cases, parts of that family go from the most recent ancestor and go backwards in time to the ancient ancestors. And sometimes it doesn't go all the way back. It only goes partially back. So you have all these factors that contribute to a very fragmented text. And then on top of that, you're going to have lacunae, which are going to be gaps in this ancient text where it was damaged. Perhaps the ancient scribe was drinking his compatible cup of joe in the day, and he accidentally spilt it on his document. Or perhaps it was damaged in the fire. Maybe it was damaged because there was flooding. There's all these different reasons, mold, mildew, why an ancient document could have been damaged. And then you have later scribes working, trying to preserve that document, and they come into these issues and they try to preserve it the best they can. From all indications, it appears the scribes did the best they had with the information that they had available. So let's start let's start with Samuel 1:1, because this is germane to the book of Samuel and Samuel's direct lineage. And this is what we have for Samuel's lineage. We have Samuel, Elkanah, Jehoram, Elihu, Tohu, and Zuph. And I am giving these in the English version because I think most of my audience today really speaks English, and I want this to be relatable. And I am going to print this eventually, and it will have more of the Hebrew taken into account with this. Now, let's go to 1 Chronicles 6. This is specifically verses 23 through 28, because it's repeated many, many times in 1 Chronicles 6. So in 1 Chronicles 6, we find this genealogy for Samuel. It's Samuel, Elkanah, Jehoram, Eliab, Nathan, which this would be compatible with the Tohu, and Zophah for Zuph. So you find that these are very, very compatible. And this lineage in 1 Chronicles 6 specifically traces back to Kohath, the son of Levi. So you know that there are several sons of Kohath. There's Amram, Issachar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And these are direct descendants of Levi, where Moses and Aaron actually also find their lineage through Amram, also going back to Kohath. So these would have been the family of Levites that would have served in Israel, where, Moses and Aaron find their lineage descending through Amram. You find that Samuel and Elkanah find their lineage going through Korah. And Korah is this specific division that Elkanah's family traces to. Now, this lineage is repeated again a few verses later in 1 Chronicles 6 and verses 32 through 38. And this would have been the temple singers in the time of David and Solomon, where they were established for service in what would have become the temple in Jerusalem. And this is the lineage that we find. We find that there's Samuel, who is registered by a variant spelling of Shemuel. It's vowel pointed later, but it is a variant spelling. Then you find Elkanah, Jehoram, we find Eliel for Elihu, Toha for Tohu, and the other variant is Nahath. And then we find Zuph, which is the same as in 1 Samuel 1:1, where in 1 Samuel 23 through 28 is Zophah. So we find that there's a very, very cogent genealogy here, even though it might be using variant spellings. Then we find there's a huge gap. There is some conflation in names, because we find that during the Judges period, Elkanah is mentioned again. And then we find that the firm chronology that we have for Elkanah begins with Asir, and this is going back to what would have been the early Judges period, and perhaps even the very, very latter Exodus period. We have Asir, Korah, Izhar, Kohath, and Levi. So we find that there is very, very strong evidence for Elkanah's Levitical, and not just Levitical, but Kohen priestly lineage through Korah, the son of Levi. Now, we also find that there is another compatible text in Exodus 6:16, and this is the the lineage that is given in Exodus 6. It says Levi, Kohath, Izhar, Korah, Asir, Elkanah. So there is a gap here, a huge gap. And you know, the other factor that I think, let me mention, which would be a sixth factor in the genealogies, is that genealogies were not always recorded. You have huge gaps where sometimes they were recorded. I have found in ancient Israel's history, you find that their history writing in Kings and Chronicles directly corresponds to righteous epochs in the nation's history, where you had a righteous king ruling. You find that when there was a wicked king ruling, they really didn't care about Israel's history. They didn't record, they didn't write anything, because they were really focused on other things and older, mainly kind of more on cultic activities and living their lives, maybe even getting high, as we saw at Tel El Rod, rather than actually preserving an accurate history. Now, I want to go back to this just a little bit more, because it's very, very interesting. We find that Asaph, during the days of David and Solomon, also was of the descendants of Korah. You find that this family became the temple singers in the temple. Samuel's sons are mentioned as Joel and Haman, but there's some conflation there because they're also mentioned as Asaph's sons. So there is some lacuna likely with the text, because these descendants are specifically listed as prophets and singers during David and Solomon's period. Also of interest, when David tries to bring up the Ark of the Covenant, and Uzzah is struck dead, and he places the Ark in the house of Obed-Edom. You find that Obed-Edom and his sons are also listed as Levites, specifically of the sons of Kohath, and also the sons of Korah, through Korah. So this brings us back to the question of Elkanah. And what does it mean when Elkanah was an Ephrathite? Now, does this mean that he was traced his lineage through Ephraim, and he wasn't a Levite, although we have all this other evidence to support that he was? What does this mean? Well, to find this, we actually have to go back to the division of land at the Exodus and Judges period. And I'm going to post a Wikipedia link in this a little bit later, and I will also attach it to the comments that have the Dropbox document earlier. And I'll put this on YouTube as well. That is, and this is really the key. When the Levites were divided among all the tribes of Israel, you find that specific families were divided among specific tribes in Israel. Now, guess what is the only family to be divided in Ephraim's territory? It is Kohath. Kohath is the only family of Levites. And this again, it goes Kohath and then Korah, the family of Korah, that were divided into specifically the tribe of Ephraim and specifically Mount Ephraim. So then when the text states that Elkanah was an Ephrathite, it's not stating this based on his lineage. It is stating this based on his physical dwelling place, the location in which he lived and where he was from. So now let's go back to Samuel. Samuel was a legitimate priest of the sons of Korah, of the sons of Kohath, and he could serve Israel in a priestly capacity. And you find that during the days of David, that it was the sons of Kohath and the sons of Korah that had the primary function in service around the Ark of the Covenant. Now, we're going to get back into this a little bit later. We are going to be looking at the sons of Aaron separately and how they come into play in this. Excuse me, I'm still a little dry this morning. But what is fascinating is that you find that there is a reliable history. You find that, we should find, if this is an ancient text, we should find issues with an ancient text. Just even working with modern genealogies and trying to go back. It is very, very difficult to reconstruct. But when you have an ancestor's name that is repeated over and over again, you're going to have errors. You're going to have discrepancies as scholars or scribes in different eras work with that text. And this is exactly what the genealogies demonstrate. And they do not demonstrate a hand in the trying to create a faux history or trying to reconstruct and make a legitimate history for somebody that was illegitimate. But we find something that is very cogent. If this was something where a dubious hand was at play, we should find that all the names throughout the text are rendered exactly the same rather than finding variants from the hands of different scribes. So that is just a view for today. It is ideas to consider, factors to consider. I will be publishing something on this in the future that takes into consideration more factors from the text. But I do want to delve into this before we get back into the discussion of high places, because it really influences how we understand high places to have played in Israel's history for 150-year period when there was no viable centralized location for Israel to have worshiped Yahweh. And what we do find, just to reiterate again from our previous class, is that Samuel would go on a circuit through the high places of his day. He would offer sacrifices. He wore a linen ephod. He served Israel in a Levitical priestly capacity, whether he was at his hometown of Ramathaim Zophrah, or whether he was in Gilead, which was another high place. Also, we have Mizpah, although it's really it doesn't necessarily state that Mizpah was a high place, but it appears that it was. And we also have Bethel that is mentioned as another high place. So these gained popularity, and we're going to get back into the archaeology of this. But these gained popularity right during this 12th and 11th century BCE. And we're going to come back and see that the archaeology supports this. There was no viable option for Israel, so they turned to local locations until in 972 BCE, the Temple of Solomon was completed in Jerusalem, and Israel was then encouraged to abandon these high places. And we will see over time that these high places that once functioned with Levitical priests in them, and had a very monotheistic worship of Yahweh in them, as time progresses, they become corrupt. You begin to have worship of Baal and Asherah, and other deities in these locations, and they become something that then is no longer a legitimate option of Israel because they are profaned with the conflation of worship to other deities. So this is an overview. I hope that this genealogical study enlightens your study of the text. It certainly has mine. And I encourage you to join me next time. And do be looking for another, I'm going to come on a little bit later today and read another excerpt from my forthcoming book, Does Jesus Exist? And I am so excited to share this with you. So thank you for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you Monday on another episode of Coffee, Tea, and Torah. Have a great day.